By late 1943, Rabaul, on New Britain Island, stood as the absolute cornerstone of Japan's defensive perimeter in the vast South Pacific. It was, quite simply, the Imperial Japanese Navy's Pacific Gibraltar. This volcanic caldera, transformed into a fortress, represented the zenith of Japanese military engineering and strategic foresight in the region. Here, over 100,000 soldiers and sailors formed an unyielding garrison. Beneath the jungle canopy and carved into the volcanic rock lay a labyrinth of tunnels, supply depots, and command bunkers. The skies above were guarded by 7 airfields, including the massive Lakunai and Vunakanau fields, home to hundreds of Zero fighters and Betty bombers. These air assets were designed to project power across 1,000 miles of ocean. Rabaul was not merely a bastion. It was a vital operational hub. Its deep-water harbor, Simpson Harbor, sheltered elements of the combined fleet, including heavy cruisers and destroyers. From here, convoys resupplied garrisons across the Solomons and New Guinea. It was the nerve center, the logistical heart of Japan's southern expansion, a forward operating base deemed indispensable. The Japanese High Command held an almost sacred pride in Rabaul's impregnability. They believed with fervent conviction that no Allied force could ever overcome its defenses or dislodge its tenacious defenders. This confidence, this absolute certainty, would soon transform from a shield of pride into a prison of despair, as the war's tide inexorably turned. By late 1943, Rabaul stood as the formidable heart of Japan's southern defensive perimeter, a bastion believed by Tokyo to be utterly impregnable. More than 100,000 Imperial Japanese Army and Navy personnel formed its colossal garrison, a force larger than many national armies. These defenders comprised elite units like the 17th Infantry Division and elements of the 11th Air Fleet, all meticulously entrenched. The strategic port city nestled on New Britain had been transformed into a sprawling, self-sufficient fortress. A vast network of 5 operational airfields, including Lakunai and Vunakanau, launched hundreds of aircraft daily, providing critical air cover for the entire region. Heavy coastal artillery batteries, concrete bunkers, and machine gun nests turned every potential landing zone into a pre-registered killing field. Beneath the surface, an intricate labyrinth of over 350 miles of tunnels snaked through the volcanic rock. These subterranean arteries housed hospitals, command centers, vast ammunition dumps, and immense food depots designed to withstand months, even years, of Allied bombardment or siege. The Japanese High Command had poured unprecedented resources into Rabaul's development, making it the most heavily defended position in the entire Pacific. This formidable investment fueled a profound conviction among its commanders that Rabaul could never fall. Initially, Allied strategy, spearheaded by commanders like General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Ernest King, aimed directly at Rabaul. This formidable Japanese stronghold was considered the linchpin of the entire Bismarck archipelago defense. Early plans envisioned its direct capture, a massive amphibious operation to seize this critical forward base. But as intelligence filtered back from reconnaissance missions and captured documents, a grim reality began to emerge. The Imperial Japanese Army had transformed Rabaul into an almost impenetrable fortress, a labyrinth of dug-in positions and heavily reinforced strong points. Its defenses included multiple airfields, vast underground bunkers, and a garrison that swelled to over 100,000 men. Initial intelligence estimates presented to the Joint Chiefs of Staff were sobering. They predicted that a direct assault, a full-scale invasion, could result in casualty figures reaching well over 100,000 Allied soldiers, perhaps even twice that. Such numbers were unprecedented since the American Civil War itself, a projected bloodbath that chilled even the most hardened strategists. This immense human cost, coupled with the colossal logistical effort required to sustain such an invasion, began to make the direct capture of Rabaul an increasingly undesirable option. The prospect of sacrificing tens of thousands of lives for a single objective, however strategic, started to force a radical rethinking among the highest levels of Allied command. The sheer scale of the estimated loss demanded an alternative. With the immense human cost of a direct assault becoming glaringly apparent and increasingly unacceptable, Allied High Command began to explore alternatives. The immediate, logical next step was to test Rabaul's defenses from the air. In early 1943, General George C. Kenney's 5th Air Force, already seasoned in the harsh skies over New Guinea, began a sustained air campaign against the fortress. Heavy bombers, B-17s and B-24s, flew mission after mission, targeting the complex of Japanese airfields, supply depots, and naval facilities. However, Rabaul was no ordinary target. The Japanese had transformed it into an aerial porcupine, bristling with over 400 anti-aircraft guns, ranging from 25mm to 120mm caliber. This dense curtain of flak, combined with a formidable screen of Imperial Navy Zero fighters, exacted a heavy toll on Allied air crews. Many aircraft, struggling through the intense defenses, found their bombs causing superficial damage to a target that seemed to shrug off the blows. Beneath the volcanic soil, the Japanese garrison had burrowed deep. Miles of tunnels, meticulously constructed, housed command centers, hospitals, supply dumps, and even aircraft workshops. What appeared from above to be a destroyed airfield could be operational again within hours, thanks to the protected repair crews and the sheer resilience of the engineering units. Major General Hitoshi Imamura, commander of the 8th Area Army, reported to Tokyo that his men were unshakable, their morale boosted by the effective underground shelters. These early, costly air campaigns, spanning months and consuming hundreds of Allied planes, yielded a brutal realization. While individual facilities could be damaged, the core of Rabaul's strength, its garrison and its operational capacity, remained largely intact. It was a fortress that seemed impervious to air power alone. By mid-1943, the strategic calculus of war in the Pacific was fundamentally changing. The sheer cost of directly confronting Japan's island fortresses had become painfully clear. Rabaul, in particular, with its massive garrison, over 100,000 men, and formidable defenses, presented an impossible equation. Allied planners faced estimates of up to 50,000 casualties for a direct assault, a human toll deemed unacceptable. It was General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, who emerged as the bypass strategy's most vocal champion. He argued not for destruction, but for irrelevance. Why expend tens of thousands of lives and vast quantities of materiel to seize a position that could simply be isolated and starved from the main thrust of the war? His logic was brutally pragmatic. General George Kenney, MacArthur's brilliant air commander, provided the air power dimension. Early attempts to bomb Rabaul into submission had proven costly and ineffective. But Kenney realized that air power, combined with naval blockade, could effectively sever Rabaul's lifelines, preventing resupply and isolating its vast forces. The goal shifted from annihilating a garrison to rendering it strategically inert. This monumental decision, forged at the highest levels of Allied command, was a psychological earthquake that the Japanese High Command in Tokyo initially struggled to comprehend. For decades, Japanese military doctrine had revolved around the absolute defense of vital strategic points. The idea that an enemy might simply ignore such a fortress was alien, almost heretical. At Rabaul itself, commanders like General Hitoshi Imamura of the 8th Area Army and his men, stationed across New Britain and Bougainville, were poised for the inevitable invasion. They had built deep bunkers, vast tunnel complexes, and prepared for a fight to the death, confident in their impregnable position. The initial lack of a direct assault may have been interpreted not as abandonment, but as Allied indecision, or a prelude to a larger, more devastating strike. The realization that they had been bypassed and left to wither would dawn slowly with a creeping horror as their supplies dwindled and the main war moved decisively beyond their reach. The decision to bypass Rabaul swiftly translated into concrete action. By late 1943, the Allied strategic encirclement began in earnest. The intricate network of Japanese supply routes, stretching from Truk and the home islands, was systematically targeted and severed. No longer would the fortress receive the steady stream of food, fuel, and munitions it had grown accustomed to. Allied naval power, from destroyers to submarines, established a virtually impenetrable cordon around the Bismarck Sea. Japanese merchant shipping, once the lifeblood of the garrison, became prime targets for American patrol aircraft and submerged hunters. Convoy after convoy, attempting to reach Rabaul's Simpson Harbor, was intercepted and sunk. Rear Admiral Tomoshige Samajima's forces within Rabaul found their critical resupply efforts increasingly futile. Simultaneously, relentless air interdiction missions pounded Rabaul's formidable airfields and port facilities. General Kenny's 5th Air Force and Admiral Halsey's carrier-based aircraft flew thousands of sorties, transforming the skies above Rabaul into a gauntlet of flak and fighter patrols. Japanese air superiority, once absolute, evaporated. Any aircraft or vessel attempting to breach the perimeter faced overwhelming opposition, turning what was once a bastion into an aerial no-man's land. For the more than 100,000 Japanese soldiers and naval personnel trapped within Rabaul's defenses, the realization dawned with chilling certainty. The promised reinforcements never arrived. The vital supplies, dwindling by the day, were not replenished. They were marooned on an increasingly isolated island, watching the main conflict shift further and further away. The once proud garrison now felt the cold grip of abandonment. Under the pragmatic leadership of General Hitoshi Imamura, the garrison attempted an extraordinary pivot. Realizing that the silence from Tokyo meant abandonment, Imamura issued an order that defied the samurai spirit. The mandate was survival. The sprawling airfields, once the pride of the Imperial Navy, were torn up. Runways became furrows, hangars transformed into storehouses. Engineers, pilots, and infantrymen laid down their rifles to pick up hose. Over 20,000 acres of volcanic jungle were painstakingly cleared, cultivated with sweet potatoes, tapioca, and taro. Imamura maintained iron discipline, drilling his men for an invasion that would never come, while simultaneously forcing a localized industrial revolution. They built underground factories to repair equipment, distilled alcohol from vegetation, and even manufactured makeshift medicine. It was a monumental feat of human resilience, a desperate attempt to turn a prison into a self-sustaining state. Yet, sheer will could not conquer biology. As the Allied blockade tightened its chokehold, the agricultural miracle failed to feed the massive army. Rations plummeted from 800 grams of rice to a starvation diet of barely 200 grams. Hunger became a maddening obsession. The jungle was scoured for protein, soldiers resorting to eating rats, insects, snakes, and even boiling leather gear for sustenance. Then the diseases came. Malnutrition stripped their immune systems bare, inviting the silent killers of the tropics. Malaria, dysentery, and the agonizing swelling of beriberi swept through the ranks like wildfire. Medical supplies had long vanished. Surgeons, like Captain Kinjiro Kure, were forced to operate in humid caves, amputating gangrenous limbs without anesthesia, utilizing sharpened bamboo when steel scalpels failed. By late 1944, Rabaul was no longer a fortress, but a vast subterranean hospital. Tens of thousands perished, not in the glory of Banzai charges, but in the quiet, dark corners of the earth, defeated by the simple lack of a meal. Despite the growing isolation, Tokyo's Imperial General Headquarters harbored dwindling hopes of reinforcing Rabaul. Early in 1944, a few desperate attempts were made. Small convoys, laden with rice and medical supplies, tried to pierce the tightening Allied cordon. These were not grand naval operations, but clandestine runs by freighters and even submarines, hugging the coastlines under the cloak of night. But Allied air reconnaissance, operating from newly secured bases on Bougainville and the Treasury Islands, proved relentless. P-38 Lightnings and F-4U Corsairs, patrolling the Bismarck Sea, swiftly intercepted any vessel daring to approach. Surface patrols by destroyers and PT boats completed the net, ensuring that few, if any, Japanese supply ships reached their destination. The aerial stranglehold maintained by the U.S. 5th Air Force and the carrier-based air wings of Task Force 58 was absolute, suffocating. Each failed run, each ship sunk, deepened the despair within Rabaul's beleaguered garrison. Hope, a fragile commodity, dwindled with every report of intercepted vessels, every delayed or lost supply manifest. The reality was stark. The Imperial Japanese Navy, already crippled by earlier campaigns, simply lacked the resources, the ships, the fuel, the trained crews to mount any sustained relief effort. By mid-1944, Tokyo's focus had irrevocably shifted from reinforcing Rabaul to defending the inner perimeter of the empire, effectively abandoning the fortress to its fate. From the Japanese perspective, however, these were not merely failed attempts, but desperate gambles born of a desperate situation. Imperial General Headquarters faced an impossible dilemma: committing precious, irreplaceable naval assets to a likely suicide mission, or condemning over 100,000 men to slow starvation. The strategic calculation, however harsh, reflected the brutal reality of Allied material superiority, a crushing force that left few viable options. Even General Imamura, for all his ingenuity, knew the odds were insurmountable. He was a commander, left to improvise survival, not deliverance. As the Allied strategic mind shifted, so too did the Pacific War's epicenter. While the colossal Japanese garrison at Rabaul starved in slow motion, the main thrust of the Allied advance surged forward with astonishing speed. Admiral Nimitz's Central Pacific Drive, spearheaded by the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, vaulted across thousands of miles of ocean, securing critical island chains, each a stepping stone toward Japan itself. Meanwhile, General MacArthur's forces bypassed entire Japanese divisions in New Guinea, landing at places like Hollandia and Idatabe, far to the west of Rabaul, effectively leapfrogging the enemy's most formidable strongholds. The strategic landscape, once dominated by Rabaul's menacing presence, transformed dramatically. Rabaul, the once invincible bastion, the Gibraltar of the Pacific, became a forgotten backwater. Its massive defensive works, its thousands of guns and aircraft, rendered strategically irrelevant. For the 8th Area Army under General Imamura Hitoshi, isolation was a slow-acting poison. Communications withered, resupply ships ceased to arrive, and the once constant roar of Japanese air power faded into an eerie silence. Their very existence, while a drain on Allied resources for containment, held no bearing on the war's ultimate trajectory. The battles that truly mattered, the ones that would decide the fate of empires, were unfolding thousands of miles away, in the Marshalls, the Marianas, and along the New Guinea coast. From the Japanese perspective, this was a profoundly cruel fate. To be bypassed, to be forgotten, was perhaps a greater humiliation than a direct defeat in battle. General Imamura, a dedicated and capable commander, was forced to preside over the slow, agonizing destruction of his force, not by enemy bullets, but by the silent, relentless siege of starvation and disease. Over 100,000 men, once the spearhead of Japanese power, were relegated to a living death, a testament to the brutal efficiency of the Allied bypass strategy, a strategy that deliberately traded direct combat for protracted suffering. Rabaul, ultimately, would never fall to a major ground assault. Its impregnable defenses, designed to inflict catastrophic casualties on any invader, instead became a self-made prison. The fortress, once a symbol of Japanese might, was neutralized, its vast garrison effectively destroyed without a single major ground engagement. A stark, grim monument to strategic obsolescence. On August 15, 1945, the Emperor's surrender broadcast reached Rabaul. For the surviving Japanese garrison, after nearly 2 years of isolation, the war was finally over. On September 6, 1945, aboard the British aircraft carrier HMS Glory, General Hitoshi Imamura, commander of the 8th Area Army, and Vice Admiral Jinichi Kusaka, commander of the Southeast Area Fleet, formally signed the surrender documents. General Frank Berryman, representing the Australian forces, accepted their capitulation. Allied forces, landing ashore in the days that followed, encountered a scene of immense human suffering. The once formidable Japanese soldiers, numbering over 97,000 at the time of surrender, were mere shadows of their former selves. Emaciated figures, ravaged by malaria, dysentery, and tropical ulcers, moved slowly, their uniforms hanging loosely on skeletal frames. Many were too weak even to stand unaided. The scale of the attrition, not from combat, but from slow deprivation, became chillingly clear. Of the roughly 100,000 Japanese personnel initially trapped, estimates suggest over 80,000 perished during the bypass period. The overwhelming majority, nearly 90%, succumbed to starvation and disease, not enemy fire. This grim reality represented a stark counterpoint to the Allied strategic triumph. While the bypass saved countless Allied lives, it condemned an entire garrison to a prolonged, agonizing demise, a consequence that, while strategically efficient, came with an immense human cost, largely unseen by the world until the war's conclusion. The logistical challenge of sustaining such a large isolated force, coupled with the Allied blockade, transformed Rabaul into a vast open-air prison, where the true enemy was not the Allied soldier, but the ever-present hunger and illness. The bypassed garrisons, including Rabaul, became a grim testament to the effectiveness and the hidden costs of the island-hopping campaign. Here, the war ended not with a decisive battle, but with a quiet, agonizing fade, etching Rabaul into history as a symbol of the strategic genius and the terrible suffering of the Pacific War. The bypass strategy, a testament to Allied ingenuity, undoubtedly saved tens of thousands of American and Australian lives. It accelerated the war's relentless pace, shortening the conflict by months, perhaps even a year. A strategic masterpiece that avoided a bloodbath on the scale of Iwo Jima or Okinawa. For the Joint Chiefs, for MacArthur and Halsey, it was a cold, effective calculation, victory with minimal friendly casualties. Yet, for the over 100,000 Japanese soldiers trapped on Rabaul, Bougainville, and countless other bypassed islands, this strategic brilliance became a death sentence, a slow, agonizing descent into oblivion. Isolated for nearly 18 months, from late 1943 until Japan's surrender in August 1945, their war transformed into a battle against nature, against disease, against the gnawing emptiness of starvation. Dysentery, malaria, and malnutrition ravaged their ranks, more lethal than any bullet. The Imperial General Headquarters, consumed by the widening war, gradually reduced Rabaul's logistical priority. Supplies dwindled, then ceased almost entirely. These once feared garrisons, symbols of Japanese power, became forgotten prisons, their sacrifice unheralded, their suffering ignored by a world that had moved on. They were not defeated in glorious combat, but starved into submission, a fate perhaps more cruel than a direct assault. This stark reality, while militarily sound, presents a profound moral dilemma. Can strategic genius be measured solely by lives saved on one side when it explicitly condemns so many on the other to a prolonged, torturous end? The Allied High Command, operating within the brutal calculus of total war, deemed it a necessary evil, a clinical decision to preserve their own. But the shadow of those forgotten men, rotting away on distant islands, casts a long, somber legacy over the Pacific War's strategic triumphs. It underscores the brutal truth of warfare, that even the most brilliant strategic maneuvers carry an immense human cost, often borne silently by those left behind. The ghost of Rabaul, a testament to both genius and horror, continues to echo through military history. Rabaul, by late 1943, stood as a monument to Japanese resolve, a fortress deemed impregnable, bristling with over 100,000 hardened troops, extensive airfields, and a formidable naval base. Its very existence defied conventional military logic, a stronghold built to withstand any invasion. Yet its fate was sealed, not by the thunder of an Allied assault, but by the chilling silence of strategic neglect. The Allied Joint Chiefs of Staff, particularly General George C. Marshall, championed a revolutionary doctrine, one that prioritized lives over territory. By bypassing Rabaul, by isolating its massive garrison, they saved tens of thousands of Allied casualties. Estimates ranged from 25,000 to 50,000 men, and accelerated the Pacific War's conclusion by critical months. It was a strategic masterstroke, a testament to ingenuity over conventional might. But for the 100,000 Japanese defenders and the 20,000 Korean and Japanese laborers trapped on New Britain, the bypass was a slow, agonizing sentence. For 18 months, from late 1943 until Japan's surrender in August 1945, they withered. Malaria, dysentery, and starvation decimated their ranks, their once proud units reduced to hollow shells. By war's end, only 69,000 remained alive, a fraction of the original force, their surrender marked by the ghost of famine, not battle. The bypassed garrisons, including Rabaul, became a grim testament to the effectiveness and the hidden costs of the island-hopping campaign. Here, the war ended not with a decisive battle, but with a quiet, agonizing fade, etching Rabaul into history as a symbol of the strategic genius and the terrible suffering of the Pacific War. The bypass strategy, a testament to Allied ingenuity, undoubtedly saved tens of thousands of American and Australian lives. It accelerated the war's relentless pace, shortening the conflict by months, perhaps even a year. A strategic masterpiece that avoided a bloodbath on the scale of Iwo Jima or Okinawa. For the Joint Chiefs, for MacArthur and Halsey, it was a cold, effective calculation, victory with minimal friendly casualties. Yet, for the over 100,000 Japanese soldiers trapped on Rabaul, Bougainville, and countless other bypassed islands, this strategic brilliance became a death sentence, a slow, agonizing descent into oblivion. Isolated for nearly 18 months, from late 1943 until Japan's surrender in August 1945, their war transformed into a battle against nature, against disease, against the gnawing emptiness of starvation. Dysentery, malaria, and malnutrition ravaged their ranks, more lethal than any bullet. The Imperial General Headquarters, consumed by the widening war, gradually reduced Rabaul's logistical priority. Supplies dwindled, then ceased almost entirely. These once feared garrisons, symbols of Japanese power, became forgotten prisons, their sacrifice unheralded, their suffering ignored by a world that had moved on. They were not defeated in glorious combat, but starved into submission, a fate perhaps more cruel than a direct assault. This stark reality, while militarily sound, presents a profound moral dilemma. Can strategic genius be measured solely by lives saved on one side when it explicitly condemns so many on the other to a prolonged, torturous end? The Allied High Command, operating within the brutal calculus of total war, deemed it a necessary evil, a clinical decision to preserve their own. But the shadow of those forgotten men, rotting away on distant islands, casts a long, somber legacy over the Pacific War's strategic triumphs. It underscores the brutal truth of warfare, that even the most brilliant strategic maneuvers carry an immense human cost, often borne silently by those left behind. The ghost of Rabaul, a testament to both genius and horror, continues to echo through military history. Rabaul, by late 1943, stood as a monument to Japanese resolve, a fortress deemed impregnable, bristling with over 100,000 hardened troops, extensive airfields, and a formidable naval base. Its very existence defied conventional military logic, a stronghold built to withstand any invasion. Yet its fate was sealed, not by the thunder of an Allied assault, but by the chilling silence of strategic neglect. The Allied Joint Chiefs of Staff, particularly General George C. Marshall, championed a revolutionary doctrine, one that prioritized lives over territory. By bypassing Rabaul, by isolating its massive garrison, they saved tens of thousands of Allied casualties. Estimates ranged from 25,000 to 50,000 men, and accelerated the Pacific War's conclusion by critical months. It was a strategic masterstroke, a testament to ingenuity over conventional might. But for the 100,000 Japanese defenders and the 20,000 Korean and Japanese laborers trapped on New Britain, the bypass was a slow, agonizing sentence. For 18 months, from late 1943 until Japan's surrender in August 1945, they withered. Malaria, dysentery, and starvation decimated their ranks. their once proud units reduced to hollow shells. By war's end, only 69,000 remained alive, a fraction of the original force, their surrender marked by the ghost of famine, not battle. While the Allied strategy achieved its military objectives with startling efficiency, minimizing friendly losses, it simultaneously orchestrated a forgotten humanitarian catastrophe for the opposing force. The Japanese High Command, consumed by other desperate fronts, proved incapable of resupplying or evacuating their isolated garrisons, leaving their soldiers to face a slow demise, a grim outcome rarely discussed in the annals of strategic victory. The story of Rabaul, therefore, is more than a chapter in military strategy. It is a haunting lesson, a stark reminder that even the most innovative and successful maneuvers carry a hidden cost. The ghost of Rabaul, an invincible fortress starved into submission, serves as an enduring testament to both the genius of strategic thought and the immense quiet suffering of those left behind by the inexorable march of war.